The dust kicked up from the gravel road as Sarah's old Honda Civic sputtered to a stop outside the Broken Arrow Ranch. Steam billowed from under the hood like a white flag of surrender. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning pale against her sun-weathered hands. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not today. Not when she was already running 3 hours late for what might be the most important job interview of her life. Sarah stepped out of the car and immediately felt the scorching Nevada heat hit her like a physical wall. Her worn business suit, the only professional outfit she owned, was already sticking to her skin. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was dressed for a corporate boardroom while standing in the middle of what looked like the Wild West. Rolling hills stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with cattle and bordered by mountains that seemed to touch the cloudless sky. The ranch house sat about a quarter-mile down a dirt path, its weathered wood siding and wraparound porch giving it a timeless quality. Several outbuildings were scattered around the property, and she could see horses grazing in a nearby pasture. Smoke rose from a chimney despite the heat, and the whole scene looked like something from a postcard or a movie about simpler times. Sarah had driven 8 hours from Los Angeles for this opportunity. The classified ad had been brief. Housekeeper and cook needed for working ranch. Room and board provided. Must be hardworking and reliable. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And after losing her apartment and her job at the restaurant when it closed down, honest work was exactly what she needed. She opened the hood of her car and stared at the engine like it might suddenly reveal its secrets. A cloud of steam obscured her view, and she had to step back. Coughing, the radiator was bone dry, and there was a puddle of green coolant spreading beneath the car. Even with her limited mechanical knowledge, she could tell this wasn't something that could be fixed with a quick roadside repair. "Car trouble?" a voice asked from behind her. Sarah spun around, startled. A man was walking up the gravel road from the direction of the ranch house. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of years of outdoor work. His jeans were faded and practical, his boots were scuffed leather, and his cowboy hat was tilted at just the right angle to shade his eyes from the afternoon sun. Everything about him seemed to belong to this landscape in a way that made Sarah feel even more out of place. "Yes," she said, gesturing helplessly at the car. "I think the radiator gave out. I'm supposed to be at the Broken Arrow Ranch for an interview, but now..." She trailed off, feeling the weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. "You're Sarah Mitchell?" he asked, and she nodded. "I'm Jack Coleman. I own the ranch. Looks like you found us, even if your car didn't want to make the full journey." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. This was not the first impression she had hoped to make. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The car started overheating about 50 miles back. But I thought I could make it. I should have stopped and called, but I don't have a cell phone, and..." She realized she was rambling and forced herself to stop. Jack tipped his hat back slightly and studied her car with the same calm attention he might give to an injured horse. "Old Honda Civics are good cars, but they don't much like desert heat when their cooling systems start to fail. When did you last have the radiator serviced?" Sarah felt another wave of embarrassment. Honestly, I don't know. I bought it used about 2 years ago, and I've just been keeping up with oil changes when I could afford them." There was no judgment in Jack's expression, just understanding. "Money's been tight," he said simply. "And it wasn't a question. Very tight," Sarah admitted. "This job. If you're still willing to consider me despite this disaster, this job would mean everything to me." Jack was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving from the broken-down car to Sarah's face. She tried to read his expression, but his features were as weathered and unreadable as the landscape around them. She found herself studying his hands as he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. They were working hands, scarred and strong, but there was something gentle about the way he carried himself that surprised her. "Tell you what," Jack said finally. "Why don't we get you out of this heat first, and then we can figure out what to do about your car? The interview can wait until you've had some water and a chance to cool down." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Are you sure? I know I'm late, and first impressions are important, and I've already— Sarah, Jack interrupted gently. You drove 8 hours to get here. Your car broke down 50 yards from my front gate. That tells me you're determined and you don't give up easy. Those are the kinds of qualities I'm looking for in someone who's going to work on this ranch. The kindness in his voice caught her off guard. Sarah had spent the last several months dealing with landlords demanding rent, employers who laid her off without notice, and a world that seemed determined to kick her when she was down. She had learned to expect the worst from people, especially from men who held power over her economic survival. But there was something different about Jack Coleman, something that made her want to trust him even though every instinct told her to be careful. They walked together down the dirt path toward the ranch house. Sarah could feel the dust settling on her shoes with each step, and she was acutely aware that her business attire was completely wrong for this environment. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with unspoken questions on both sides. The ranch house was larger up close than it had appeared from the road. The front porch was wide and welcoming, with 2 rocking chairs positioned to catch the evening breeze. Wind chimes made of horseshoes hung from the porch ceiling, creating a soft metallic melody when the wind caught them. The front door was solid wood, painted a deep red that had faded to a comfortable burgundy over the years. Built this place myself, Jack said, noticing her attention to the details. Took me 3 summers, working evenings and weekends around the ranch work. My grandfather always said a man should build his own house if he can, and his own life too. It's beautiful, Sarah said, and she meant it. There was something honest about the construction, something that spoke of patience and care, rather than speed and profit. Jack opened the front door and gestured for her to go ahead. The interior was cool and dim after the bright heat outside. The living room was simple but comfortable, with furniture that looked handmade and built to last. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the mantel was decorated with photographs and what looked like family heirlooms. The floors were hardwood, worn smooth by years of use, and colorful rugs were scattered throughout the room. Sit down, Jack said, indicating a comfortable-looking armchair. I'll get you some water, and then we can talk about what brought you all the way out here. As he disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, Sarah took the opportunity to look around more carefully. The photographs on the mantel showed the ranch in various stages of development, from what looked like raw land to the thriving operation she had glimpsed on her way in. There were pictures of Jack with older people who were probably his parents or grandparents, and several shots of him working with horses and cattle. What struck her most was how every image seemed to tell a story of building something lasting, of putting down roots in a place and making it home. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly at home, anywhere. Her apartment in Los Angeles had been just a place to sleep between shifts at the restaurant. Before that, she had lived in a series of temporary situations, always moving when the rent went up or the lease expired or circumstances changed. Jack returned with a tall glass of ice water and a damp towel. Thought you might want to cool off a bit, he said, handing her both. The water was the best thing Sarah had tasted in hours, possibly days. She pressed the cool towel to the back of her neck and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. So, Jack said, settling into the chair across from her. Tell me about yourself. What made you decide you wanted to work on a ranch? It was the question Sarah had been dreading, because the honest answer was that desperation had made the decision for her. But sitting in Jack's comfortable living room, with his patient attention focused on her, she found herself telling the truth. I lost my job 3 months ago, she began. I was working as a waitress at a family restaurant in Los Angeles, and the owners decided to sell the building to developers. Everyone got laid off with 2 weeks' notice. I tried to find another restaurant job, but the economy's been tough, and most places want someone with more experience than I have. Jack nodded, encouraging her to continue. I lost my apartment 6 weeks ago because I couldn't make the rent. I've been staying with a friend, sleeping on her couch. But that's not a long-term solution. I saw your ad in the paper, and I thought maybe I could start over somewhere new. I know I don't have ranch experience, but I'm a hard worker, and I learn fast. What kind of work have you done before? Jack asked. Mostly restaurant work, Sarah said. But I've also cleaned houses. Worked in a hotel laundry. Done some retail. I know how to cook basic meals and keep a house clean. I'm good with my hands, and I don't mind physical work. Any experience with animals? Sarah shook her head. Not really. I always wanted a dog when I was growing up, but we moved around too much. My mom said pets were just another thing to worry about when you had to pack up and leave. There was something in the way she said it that made Jack study her face more carefully. Sarah realized she had revealed more than she intended about her childhood. About the instability that had shaped her life long before she ended up sleeping on friends' couches in Los Angeles. What about your family now? Jack asked gently. Anyone you're leaving behind in California? No, Sarah said simply. It's just me. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simple meaning suggested. Sarah had learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity, but she was beginning to understand that self-sufficiency and loneliness weren't the same thing. Jack was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if she had said too much, revealed too much of her desperation. She had been rejected for jobs before because employers thought she was too needy, too desperate, too much of a risk. But when Jack spoke again, his voice was kind. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations, he said. My grandfather started it with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone thought possible. He taught my father that the land would take care of you if you took care of it, and that the same was true of people. Sarah wasn't sure what to say to that, so she waited for him to continue. I've been running this place on my own for the last 2 years, Jack went on. It's good work, honest work. But it's more than one person can handle alone. I need someone who can help with the house. Cook meals that stick to your ribs, and maybe learn to help with some of the lighter ranch work as time goes on. I would love to learn, Sarah said quickly. I know I don't have experience, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Jack smiled for the first time since she had met him, and Sarah was surprised by how it transformed his face. The seriousness that seemed carved into his features softened, and she could see warmth in his dark eyes. The work starts before sunrise and doesn't end until the animals are settled for the night, he warned. The pay isn't much by city standards, but room and board are included, and there's a small cabin behind the main house that would be yours. It's nothing fancy, but it's private and comfortable. Sarah felt her heart racing. Are you offering me the job? I'm offering you a trial period, Jack said carefully. 30 days. That'll give us both time to see if this arrangement works. If it does, we can talk about making it permanent. Sarah set down her water glass because her hands were starting to shake. I accept, she said without hesitation. When do I start? Well, Jack said, glancing toward the window where her broken-down car was visible in the distance. It looks like you've already started, whether you plan to or not. But first, we need to figure out what to do about your car. The reality of her situation came crashing back. Even if she had a job now, she still had a dead car on Jack's property and no way to get back to Los Angeles to collect her things. I don't have money for major repairs, she admitted, or for a tow truck to take it anywhere. Let me take a look at it, Jack said. I'm pretty handy with engines. Might be something simple that we can fix here. If not, we'll figure out something else. As they walked back outside together, Sarah felt a mixture of hope and fear that she wasn't sure how to process. In the span of an hour, her life had taken a completely unexpected turn. She had gone from being homeless and jobless to having both a place to live and work to do. But she had also committed herself to a life she knew nothing about, in a place that was as foreign to her as another planet. Jack knelt beside her car and began examining the engine with the same calm attention he had given everything else. Sarah watched his hands as he checked hoses and connections, noting the careful, methodical way he approached the problem. Looks like the main radiator hose gave out, he said after a few minutes. That's why all your coolant leaked out. The hose itself isn't expensive, but your radiator's pretty corroded. It's been leaking for a while. Probably slowly enough that you didn't notice until today. How much would it cost to fix? Sarah asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. For a proper repair, you're looking at maybe $400 or $500, Jack said. But I've got an idea that might work better for both of us. He stood up and brushed the dust off his knees. "I've got an old pickup truck that I use for ranch work. It's not pretty, but it runs good and it's reliable. What if we call this car payment for your first month's room and board? I can use it for parts, and you can use the truck when you need to get into town." Sarah stared at him. "You would do that?" "It's practical," Jack said with a shrug. "I need the parts more than I need the money, and you need transportation more than you need this particular car." But Sarah could see that it was more than practical. It was generous in a way that she wasn't used to, especially from someone who barely knew her. She felt tears starting to form in her eyes and turned away, not wanting him to see. "Hey," Jack said softly, and she felt his hand touch her shoulder briefly. A gentle contact that somehow managed to be both comforting and respectful. "It's going to be okay," Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She had been strong for so long, handling one crisis after another, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer help without expecting something in return. "Why don't I show you the cabin?" Jack suggested. "You can get settled in. And tomorrow we'll start figuring out how this whole arrangement is going to work." They walked together across the ranch yard, past the main house and several outbuildings. The cabin sat in a small grove of cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling in the late afternoon breeze. It was small but well-maintained, with a covered front porch and windows that looked out toward the mountains. Inside, the cabin was simply furnished but comfortable. There was a main room that served as both living area and bedroom, with a small kitchen along one wall and a bathroom in the back. Everything was clean and functional, and there were personal touches that suggested Jack had taken care to make it welcoming. Fresh flowers in a mason jar on the table, clean linens on the bed, and a basket of basic groceries on the kitchen counter. "I wasn't sure when you'd arrive," Jack said, "so I picked up a few things to get you started. There's coffee, bread, eggs, some canned goods. Tomorrow I'll show you where everything is in the main house kitchen." Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the view. The mountains were turning purple in the distance, and the setting sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that she had never seen in the city. It was so quiet that she could hear her own breathing, so peaceful that she felt some of the tension she had carried for months beginning to dissolve. "Jack," she said, turning back to face him, "I need you to know something." He waited, his expression patient and attentive. "I'm not running from anything illegal," she said. "I don't have debts to dangerous people or an abusive ex-boyfriend or anything like that. But I am running from a life that wasn't working, from a feeling like I was drowning a little more every day. I don't want you to think you're getting involved in some kind of drama." Jack considered this for a moment. "We all run from things sometimes," he said finally. "The question is whether we're running toward something better. What do you think you're running toward?" Sarah looked around the small cabin, at the evidence of Jack's thoughtfulness in preparing it for her, at the view of endless sky outside the window. "I think I'm running toward a chance to build something," she said. "Maybe for the first time in my life." "That's a good thing to run toward," Jack said. "And this is a good place to do the building." After he left, Sarah sat on the porch steps and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The silence was vast and complete, broken only by the distant sound of cattle and the whisper of wind through the trees. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that everything might actually be okay. She thought about the conversation they had had in his living room, about the way Jack had listened without judgment when she told him about losing her job and her apartment. She thought about his offer to trade her broken car for a month's room and board, about the groceries he had stocked in her cabin, about the gentle way he had touched her shoulder when he saw her tears. Sarah had learned to be suspicious of kindness, especially from men who had power over her circumstances. But there had been something different about Jack's kindness, something that felt genuine rather than calculated. Still, she reminded herself to be careful. She had made the mistake before of trusting too quickly, of mistaking temporary kindness for lasting care. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah made herself a simple dinner and tried to plan for the days ahead. Tomorrow would be her first real day as a ranch employee, and she had no idea what to expect. But for tonight, she had a roof over her head, food in her stomach, and the promise of honest work in a place where the air was clean and the horizons were endless. It was more than she had had that morning. And for now, It felt like everything. Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was or why sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar windows. Then memory flooded back. The broken car. The job interview that had turned into something unexpected. Jack Coleman's quiet kindness, and the small cabin that was now, at least temporarily, home. She checked the old alarm clock on the bedside table and gasped. It was already 6:30, and Jack had mentioned that ranch work started before sunrise. She threw on her clothes, ran a brush through her hair, and hurried toward the main house, hoping she hadn't already proven herself unreliable on her first official day. The ranch yard was alive with activity. Jack was loading feed into the back of an old pickup truck, and several horses had gathered near the fence, their breath visible in the cool morning air. The sun was just beginning to touch the mountain peaks, painting them gold against a sky that was still more night than day. "Morning," Jack called when he saw her approaching. His greeting was friendly, but Sarah could see that he had already been working for some time. His boots were dusty, and there was hay clinging to his jacket. "I'm sorry I overslept," Sarah said, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "I should have asked what time you wanted me to start." "Relax," Jack said with a smile. "It's your first day. Besides, I figured you might need the sleep after everything that happened yesterday." "How did you sleep in the cabin?" "Like a rock," Sarah admitted. "I can't remember the last time it was so quiet at night." "That's one of the benefits of being this far from the city," Jack said, "though it takes some getting used to if you're accustomed to sirens and traffic noise." He finished loading the feed and dusted his hands on his jeans. "Want to come with me to feed the horses? I can show you around the property and explain how things work around here." Sarah climbed into the passenger seat of the pickup truck, noting how different it was from her small Honda. The truck was older and more practical, built for function rather than comfort, but it started immediately and ran with the steady confidence of a machine that was well maintained and regularly used. As they drove across the ranch, Jack pointed out various landmarks and explained the layout of the operation. There were 3 main pastures for the cattle, a separate area for the horses, several outbuildings that housed equipment and feed, and a workshop where Jack did repairs and maintenance. "The ranch runs about 200 head of cattle," he explained as they bounced along a dirt road that wound between fenced pastures. "Mostly beef cattle, though I keep a few dairy cows for our own use. The horses are working animals, not show horses. They help with herding cattle and getting around the rougher parts of the property." Sarah listened carefully, trying to absorb information about a way of life that was completely foreign to her. The scale of it was overwhelming. In Los Angeles, she had lived in spaces measured in square feet. Here, the ranch covered several square miles, and Jack spoke casually about distances that would have been significant journeys in the city. They stopped near a large pasture where about a dozen horses were waiting by the fence. Jack backed the truck up to a feeding area and began throwing hay over the fence. The horses approached with calm familiarity, and Sarah was struck by how massive they were up close. "Ever been around horses before?" Jack asked, noticing her expression. "Only at a petting zoo when I was little," Sarah said. "They're bigger than I expected." These are working horses, so they're bred for size and strength rather than speed," Jack explained. He whistled softly, and a large bay horse approached the fence. "This is Rusty. He's been with me for 8 years, and he's got more sense than most people I know." Jack reached out to stroke the horse's neck, and Sarah could see the easy familiarity between man and animal. Rusty nuzzled against Jack's hand, clearly comfortable with the attention. "Want to try?" Jack asked. Sarah hesitated. The horse was beautiful, but also intimidating. "What if he doesn't like me?" "Horses are good judges of character," Jack said. "If you're calm and gentle, he'll respond the same way." Sarah reached out tentatively and touched Rusty's neck. His coat was warm and softer than she had expected, and she could feel the powerful muscles beneath the skin. Rusty turned his head slightly to look at her, and she was surprised by the intelligence in his dark eyes. "He likes you," Jack said, and Sarah felt a small surge of pride. They finished feeding the horses and moved on to check the cattle. This involved driving to several different pastures and making sure the animals had adequate water and that the fences were in good repair. Jack explained how the rotation system worked, how they moved cattle from pasture to prevent overgrazing, and how they kept records of breeding and healthcare for each animal. "It's more complicated than most people realize," Jack said as they watched a small herd of cattle grazing peacefully in the morning sun. "You're not just raising animals, you're managing an ecosystem. Everything has to be in balance. The grass, the water, the wildlife, the weather patterns." Sarah was beginning to understand that ranching was as much about observation and planning as it was about physical work. Jack noticed everything. Which animals looked healthy, which pastures needed rest, where fences might need repair, how the grass was growing in different areas. He carried this information in his head like a mental map of the entire operation. By the time they returned to the ranch house, it was nearly 10 o'clock, and Sarah's stomach was reminding her that she had skipped breakfast in her hurry to get started. "Ready to see the kitchen?" Jack asked. "I figured today you could get familiar with the house and how I like things organized, and we can talk about meals and schedules." The kitchen in the main house was large and practical, designed for feeding people who did hard physical work. The stove was a massive gas range that looked like it belonged in a restaurant, and there was a walk-in pantry stocked with basic staples. The refrigerator was similarly oversized, and Sarah could see it was well stocked with meat, dairy products, and vegetables. "I usually eat a big breakfast around 11, Jack explained, "after I've done the morning chores. Lunch is simple, often just sandwiches eaten on the go. Dinner is the main meal, usually around 7 when all the work is done for the day." Sarah nodded, making mental notes. "What do you usually like for breakfast?" "Eggs, bacon, sometimes pancakes or biscuits. Nothing fancy, but plenty of it. Ranch work burns a lot of calories. I can handle that," Sarah said, feeling more confident. Cooking was one skill she possessed, even if her experience was mostly with diner food rather than ranch meals. "Why don't you start with breakfast today?" Jack suggested. "I need to check on some equipment in the workshop, and then I'll come back and eat. Take your time getting familiar with where everything is." After Jack left, Sarah explored the kitchen more thoroughly. It was well organized and efficiently designed, with everything positioned for maximum functionality. She found the basic ingredients for a substantial breakfast and began planning a meal that would demonstrate her competence. As she worked, Sarah thought about the morning she had just experienced. The physical beauty of the ranch was undeniable, but what struck her more was the sense of purpose that seemed to permeate everything Jack did. Every task, from feeding animals to checking fences, was part of a larger system that he understood completely. She had worked in restaurants where chaos was the norm, where everyone was constantly stressed and nothing ever seemed to run smoothly. Here, even though the work was physically demanding, there was a rhythm and logic to it that she found appealing. Sarah was just finishing cooking when Jack returned, and she felt a flutter of nervousness as she set the plate in front of him. She had made scrambled eggs with cheese, thick-cut bacon, hash browns, and buttermilk biscuits from scratch. It was the kind of substantial meal that seemed appropriate for someone who had already put in 4 hours of physical work. Jack took a bite and nodded approvingly. "This is excellent," he said, and Sarah felt herself relax. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Working in restaurants mostly," Sarah said. "And my grandmother taught me some basics when I was young. She always said that feeding people well was one of the most important things you could do." "Smart woman," Jack said. "Good food makes everything else easier." They ate together at the kitchen table, and Sarah found herself studying Jack's face as he talked about his plans for the day. In the morning light, she could see details that had been hidden in the previous day's heat and confusion. There were laugh lines around his eyes, and a small scar on his chin that looked like it might have come from a childhood accident. His hands, which she had noticed before, showed the permanent effects of outdoor work: calluses, small scars, and skin darkened by sun and weather. But it was his manner that intrigued her most. Jack moved and spoke with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was doing. Sarah had spent most of her adult life feeling like she was improvising, making decisions based on immediate necessity rather than long-term planning. Jack seemed to approach everything from the opposite direction, as if every choice was part of a larger design. "What made you want to be a rancher?" Sarah asked as they finished eating. Jack considered the question while he drank his coffee. "I grew up here," he said finally. "My grandfather bought this land when my father was just a baby. And I spent every summer working alongside them. I went away to college for a few years, studied business and agriculture, but I always knew I'd come back." "Did you ever want to do anything else?" "For a while, I thought about veterinary school," Jack said. "I like working with animals, and there's always a need for good large animal vets in ranch country. But ultimately, I realized I wanted to raise animals, not just treat them when they're sick." Sarah could hear the conviction in his voice, the certainty of someone who had found his calling early and never doubted it. She envied that kind of clarity. Her own path through life had been driven more by necessity than choice, a series of reactions to circumstances rather than a conscious plan. "What about you?" Jack asked. "Did you ever have a job you really loved?" The question caught Sarah off guard, because she realized she had never really thought about work in terms of love. Jobs had always been about survival, about paying bills and keeping a roof over her head. The concept of actually enjoying what you did for a living was foreign to her. "I don't think so," she said honestly. "I've had jobs I didn't hate, but I never really had the luxury of thinking about whether I loved what I was doing." "When I do as," Jack nodded, and Sarah was grateful that he didn't try to offer easy reassurances or suggest that she just hadn't found the right opportunity yet. Instead, he seemed to understand that some people's relationship with work was necessarily more practical than passionate. "Well," he said, finishing his coffee and standing up from the table, "maybe this will be different. Ranch work has a way of getting into your blood if you're the type of person it's going to suit." After breakfast, Jack showed Sarah through the rest of the main house. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs, though only one showed signs of regular use. The living room she had seen the day before was clearly the heart of the house, with comfortable furniture arranged around the fireplace and bookshelves filled with volumes on agriculture, animal husbandry, and Western history. "I don't entertain much," Jack admitted as they walked through the dining room. "Most of my social life happens in town. And most of my neighbors are other ranchers who prefer to meet at the coffee shop rather than make formal visits." Sarah was cleaning the breakfast dishes when Jack left to continue his work, and she found herself alone in the house for the first time. The silence was profound but not uncomfortable. Through the kitchen window, she could see Jack working in one of the nearby pastures, moving with the same calm efficiency she had observed all morning. She spent the rest of the day familiarizing herself with the house and beginning to understand the routines that would structure her new life. Laundry needed to be done, floors needed sweeping, and there were vegetables in the garden that needed harvesting for dinner. The garden surprised her. It was larger and more diverse than she had expected, with neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, and herbs. Everything was healthy and well tended, and Sarah realized that Jack had been maintaining it himself, in addition to all his other responsibilities. As she worked in the garden, Sarah began to understand why Jack needed help. The ranch operation was vast and complex, requiring constant attention to details that could mean the difference between success and failure. Adding household management and meal preparation to that workload would be overwhelming for anyone. The afternoon heat was intense, and Sarah found herself moving more slowly as the temperature climbed toward 100 degrees. She had always considered herself physically tough, but this was different from anything she had experienced in the city. Here, the sun seemed to press down on everything with relentless intensity, and there was no escape into air-conditioned buildings or shaded parking structures. She was taking a break in the shade of the porch when she saw a cloud of dust approaching on the main road. A pickup truck turned into the ranch driveway, and Sarah felt a moment of panic. She didn't know if she was supposed to answer the door or handle visitors, and Jack was somewhere out on the property, probably too far away to notice the approaching vehicle. The truck pulled up near the main house, and an older woman climbed out. She was probably in her 60s, with silver gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of sun-weathered face that spoke of a lifetime spent outdoors. Her clothes were similar to Jack's: practical jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved shirt that protected her arms from the sun. You must be Sarah, the woman said, approaching the porch with a friendly smile. I'm Margaret Hendricks. My husband and I own the ranch about 5 miles east of here. Sarah stood up and brushed the dirt from her hands. Nice to meet you, she said, unsure of the proper protocol for this situation. Jack mentioned he'd hired someone to help out, Margaret continued. I thought I'd stop by and introduce myself. It's nice to have another woman around these parts. Sarah invited Margaret to sit on the porch, and they talked while they waited for Jack to return from wherever he was working. Margaret had been ranching with her husband for 35 years, and she had a wealth of practical knowledge about everything from preserving food to treating injured animals. It's a good life, Margaret said, looking out over the ranch with obvious satisfaction. Hard work, but good work. And Jack's one of the finest young men in the county. You're lucky to be working for him. He seems very kind, Sarah said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much about her circumstances or her first impressions. Margaret studied her face with shrewd eyes. Jack's had his share of troubles, she said gently. Lost his parents in a car accident about 5 years ago, and he's been running this place alone ever since. He works too hard and doesn't take enough time for himself, but his heart's in the right place. Sarah filed this information away, understanding now why Jack might seem older than his years. The responsibility of managing the ranch alone, especially after losing his family, would age anyone quickly. When Jack returned, dusty and tired from whatever project had occupied his afternoon, he greeted Margaret with obvious warmth. They talked about cattle prices, weather patterns, and local news, while Sarah prepared drinks for everyone. Listening to their conversation, Sarah began to understand that ranching was as much about community as it was about individual effort. The ranchers in the area depended on each other for everything from sharing equipment to helping during emergencies. Sarah made an excellent breakfast this morning, Jack told Margaret. I think this arrangement is going to work out well. I'm sure it will, Margaret said, giving Sarah an approving nod. And if you need anything, dear, or if you want to come by for coffee sometime, you're always welcome at our place. After Margaret left, Jack and Sarah worked together to prepare dinner. She cooked while he cleaned up after his day's work, and there was something comfortable about the shared domestic routine. They moved around the kitchen without getting in each other's way, and their conversation was easy and natural. Margaret's been like a second mother to me since my parents died, Jack said as they sat down to eat. She and her husband helped me through some of the roughest times, and I don't know what I would have done without them. Ever. Sarah served him a plate of grilled pork chops with vegetables from the garden and fresh bread she had baked during the afternoon. How long ago did you lose them? She asked gently. 5 years in September, Jack said. Dad had a heart attack while he was driving, and they both died in the accident. One day, I was working alongside my father, learning the business, and the next day, I was responsible for everything. Sarah could hear the pain in his voice, even after all this time. That must have been overwhelming. It was, Jack said simply. But this ranch was their life's work, and I couldn't let it fail. Some days, that was the only thing that kept me going. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself thinking about the different ways people responded to loss and trauma. She had reacted to the difficulties in her life by becoming increasingly isolated and self-protective. Jack seemed to have responded by taking on even more responsibility, by committing himself even more deeply to the work his family had started. What about you? Jack asked eventually. Tell me more about your family. Sarah had been dreading this question, because her family history was complicated and painful in ways that were difficult to explain. But Jack had shared something personal with her, and she felt obligated to return the trust. I grew up moving around a lot, she began carefully. My mother had trouble holding jobs, so we never stayed anywhere very long. I lived in probably 15 different places before I turned 18. Jack waited patiently for her to continue. My father left when I was 6, Sarah said. I haven't seen him since then. My mother did her best, but she had problems with alcohol and depression. She died 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Jack said, and the simple words carried genuine sympathy. "We were never close," Sarah continued. "I learned early that I could only really count on myself. That's part of why this is so hard for me. Accepting help from someone I barely know." Jack set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Sarah, what I'm offering isn't charity. I need help. And you need work. It's a business arrangement that benefits both of us." But even as he said it, Sarah could see that it was more than a simple business arrangement, at least for him. There was a generosity in Jack's nature that went beyond practical considerations, a desire to help that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "You should know," Sarah said, feeling compelled to be completely honest, "that I've never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years. I don't have a good track record with commitment." "What made you leave the other places?" Jack asked. Sarah thought about how to answer that question truthfully. "Sometimes, circumstances changed. Sometimes I got restless. Sometimes I just felt like I didn't belong." "And how does this feel?" Jack asked. "Do you feel like you belong here?" It was a question Sarah couldn't answer yet, because she had only been on the ranch for 24 hours. But there was something about the place, about the rhythm of life here, that felt different from anywhere she had lived before. There was a rootedness to it, a connection to the land and the work that seemed to offer possibilities she hadn't considered before. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I want to find out." After dinner, they sat on the front porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The air was cooling, and there was a breeze that carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. In the distance, Sarah could hear the cattle settling down for the night, and somewhere, an owl was calling from the cottonwood trees near her cabin. "It's so peaceful," she said, more to herself than to Jack. "That's what I love most about it," Jack said. "The peace. The feeling that you're part of something bigger than yourself." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. A sense of possibility. For the first time in her adult life, she was in a place where she might be able to build something lasting, where her work might contribute to something that would endure beyond her immediate needs. "Jack," she said, turning to face him in the gathering darkness, "you should know that I'm going to work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I won't let you down." "I believe you," Jack said quietly. "And Sarah? I think you're going to find that this place has a way of healing people, if they let it." As she walked back to her cabin under a canopy of stars brighter than any she had ever seen, Sarah allowed herself to hope that Jack might be right. 3 weeks into her new life, Sarah woke before her alarm for the first time since arriving at the ranch. She lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of dawn. Roosters announcing the sunrise, cattle moving slowly across the pastures, and the distant sound of Jack starting his morning chores. What surprised her was how much she had come to love these sounds, how they had become the soundtrack to a contentment she had never experienced before. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main house, where she found Jack in the kitchen drinking coffee and reading what looked like a letter. His expression was serious, and Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. In her experience, serious expressions often meant bad news, and bad news usually meant change. "Morning," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Everything okay?" Jack looked up and smiled, but she could see the distraction in his eyes. "Morning. Coffee's fresh. I just got a letter from my cousin in Denver. He wants to visit next week." Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and waited for more information. In the 3 weeks she had been at the ranch, no one had visited except neighbors like Margaret Hendricks, and those visits had been casual and comfortable. The prospect of someone from Jack's family arriving felt significant in a way she couldn't quite define. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" she asked. Jack folded the letter and set it aside. "Complicated thing," he said. "Michael's a good man, but he's never understood why I wanted to stay here and run the ranch. He's been trying to convince me to sell the place for years." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Sell it?" "He's a real estate developer," Jack explained. "He sees this land as an investment opportunity, not as a way of life. He thinks I'm wasting my potential by staying here." Sarah busied herself with breakfast preparations, trying not to show how much this news affected her. In just 3 weeks, the ranch had become more than a job to her. It had become home in a way that nowhere else ever had. The idea that it might not be permanent, that Jack might be persuaded to give it up, was almost unbearable. "What do you think?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the pastures where his cattle were grazing in the morning sun. "I think he's never going to understand that some things are worth more than money," he said finally. "But he's family. And he means well. So I listen to what he has to say." As she cooked breakfast, Sarah thought about the changes that had occurred in her life over the past 3 weeks. She had learned to collect eggs from the chicken coop without being afraid of the roosters. She could now help Jack with basic veterinary care for the animals, holding a calf steady while he administered vaccinations or cleaned wounds. She had mastered the enormous gas range in the kitchen and had taken over responsibility for maintaining the vegetable garden. More importantly, she had begun to feel useful in a way that was new to her. In her previous jobs, she had always felt replaceable, like someone who was filling a role that anyone could fill. Here, her contributions mattered. Jack relied on her, and the smooth functioning of the ranch depended partly on her work. She had also begun to feel something else, something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with Jack Coleman, and she had no idea what to do about it. It had happened gradually, so slowly that she hadn't recognized it at first. It was there in the way he patiently taught her about the animals, never making her feel stupid for asking questions. It was there in the way he noticed when she was tired and quietly took on extra tasks without making a big deal about it. It was there in their evening conversations on the front porch, when they talked about everything from books, to philosophy, to dreams for the future. Jack was unlike any man she had ever known. He was strong without being dominating, confident without being arrogant, and kind without being weak. He treated her as an equal partner in the ranch operation, asking for her opinions and listening carefully to her suggestions. Most importantly, he seemed to see something in her that she was only beginning to see in herself, the potential to be more than just a survivor. But Sarah had learned to be wary of her own feelings, especially when they involved men who had power over her circumstances. She was still technically on a trial basis, and she was living in housing that Jack provided. The power dynamic was complicated, and she didn't want to do anything that might jeopardize the stability she had found. "You're quiet this morning," Jack observed as they ate breakfast together. "Just thinking," Sarah said. "When is your cousin arriving?" "Sunday," Jack said. "He's flying into Las Vegas and driving up. He'll probably stay 3 or 4 days. Do you want me to prepare the guest room upstairs?" "That would be great, thanks." "And Sarah?" Jack paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Michael can be pretty direct about his opinions. If he says anything that makes you uncomfortable, just ignore him. He doesn't know anything about ranch life or the people who choose to live it." Sarah nodded, but she could feel anxiety building in her chest. She had dealt with difficult people before, but this felt different. Michael represented a threat not just to her job, but to the entire life she was building. If he convinced Jack to sell the ranch, everything she had found here would disappear. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah cleaned the guest room thoroughly, stocked it with fresh linens and flowers from the garden. She planned menus that would show off her cooking skills, hoping to make a good impression on someone whose opinion clearly mattered to Jack. She also found herself working longer hours than usual, as if she could somehow prove her indispensability through sheer effort. Jack seemed more tense as Sunday approached. He was still kind and patient, but Sarah could see the stress in the set of his shoulders and the way he sometimes stared off into the distance during their conversations. She wanted to offer comfort, but she didn't know how without overstepping boundaries that had never been clearly defined. Michael Coleman arrived on Sunday afternoon in a rented luxury sedan that looked completely out of place on the dusty ranch road. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as he climbed out of the car, noting the expensive clothes and the way he surveyed the ranch buildings with what looked like a professional appraiser's eye. He was younger than Jack, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of city life and office work. Where Jack was weathered and solid, Michael was smooth and stylish. Where Jack moved with the deliberate confidence of someone who knew his environment completely, Michael moved with the quick energy of someone accustomed to urban rhythms. Jack greeted his cousin with obvious affection, and Sarah could see the family resemblance in their facial structure and the way they both gestured when they talked. But even from a distance, she could sense the fundamental differences in their approaches to life. "Sarah," Jack called from the front door, "I'd like you to meet my cousin." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to the front porch. Michael's handshake was firm and brief. His smile polite but evaluating. She could feel him taking her measure, trying to figure out who she was and what role she played in Jack's life. "So you're the one who's been helping Jack with the ranch," Michael said. "He mentioned in his letters that he'd hired someone." I help with the house and cooking mostly," Sarah said, understating her role deliberately. Something about Michael's manner made her cautious about revealing too much. "Well, it's nice to meet you," Michael said, already turning his attention back to Jack. "Should we take that tour you promised me?" As the two men walked toward the barn, Sarah heard Michael say, "The property looks good, Jack. Really good. Have you given any more thought to what we discussed?" Asked. Sarah couldn't hear Jack's response, but she saw the tension in his posture as they disappeared into the barn. She went back into the house and tried to focus on preparing dinner. But her mind kept wandering to the conversation taking place somewhere out on the ranch. When Jack and Michael returned 2 hours later, both men looked serious. Michael's expression was animated in the way of someone making a sales pitch, while Jack looked like someone who was being pressured about something he didn't want to discuss. "The development potential here is incredible," Michael was saying as they entered the kitchen. "With the right planning, you could divide this into 50 or 60 lots, each with mountain views. The profit margin would be enormous." Jack didn't respond immediately, and Sarah could see him struggling with something. "Dinner should be ready in about an hour," she said, offering him an escape from the conversation. "Great," Jack said gratefully. "Michael, let me show you to your room so you can get settled." After they went upstairs, Sarah tried to process what she had overheard. The idea of the ranch being divided into residential lots was almost unthinkable to her. She imagined the pastures filled with houses, the quiet broken by suburban noise, the animals replaced by landscaping and swimming pools. Everything that made this place special would be destroyed. Dinner was tense, despite Sarah's best efforts to prepare an impressive meal. Michael complimented her cooking, but his attention was clearly focused on his ongoing campaign to convince Jack to sell the ranch. He talked about real estate markets, development opportunities, and the financial security that would come from liquidating the property. "You could buy a smaller place," Michael argued, "something more manageable. Maybe closer to town, where you'd have more social opportunities." "I don't want more social opportunities," Jack said quietly. "I like my life the way it is. But think about the future, Jack. What happens when you get older? What happens if you get injured and can't do the physical work anymore? Ranch life is romantic when you're young and healthy, but it's not practical long-term." Sarah saw Jack's jaw tighten, and she recognized the expression from the few times she had seen him genuinely angry. "This ranch has supported 3 generations of our family," he said. "It's not just a business investment. It's who we are." "That's exactly my point," Michael said, leaning forward earnestly. "Our grandfather and father did their part. They built something successful. Now it's time to cash in on that success and move on to the next phase." Sarah excused herself to clear the dishes, not wanting to intrude on what was clearly a family disagreement. But as she worked in the kitchen, she could hear the conversation continuing in the dining room, growing more heated as both men defended their positions. "You're wasting your life out here," Michael said, his voice rising slightly. "You're smart, educated, capable of doing anything you want. Why limit yourself to this isolated existence?" "Because this isolated existence is what I want," Jack replied, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Why is that so hard for you to understand?" "Because I care about you," Michael said. "Because I see you getting older and more set in your ways, and I worry that you're going to wake up one day and realize you've missed out on everything the world has to offer." There was a long pause, and then Jack said, "What if I told you that I think you're the one who's missing out? What if I told you that everything I want from the world is right here?" "Then I'd say you're not thinking clearly," Michael said bluntly. And I'd wonder if there were other factors influencing your judgment. Sarah froze at the kitchen sink, understanding suddenly that she might be one of those other factors. The thought that her presence might be complicating Jack's decision about the ranch was deeply disturbing. The conversation moved to the living room, and Sarah finished the dishes in silence, her mind racing. She had thought she was building a new life. But maybe she was just another temporary element in Jack's life. Someone who would be displaced when more important decisions needed to be made. When she finished cleaning up, she slipped quietly out the back door and walked to her cabin. The night air was cool, and the stars were brilliant in the clear sky. She sat on her small porch and tried to sort through her emotions. The possibility that Jack might sell the ranch forced her to confront feelings she had been trying to ignore. She wasn't just afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of losing Jack. Over the past 3 weeks, she had begun to imagine a future that included both the ranch and the man who ran it. She had allowed herself to hope that the growing closeness between them might develop into something deeper and more lasting. But Michael's visit was making her realize how precarious her situation really was. She was an outsider in Jack's family, an employee whose opinions wouldn't carry weight in major decisions about his future. If Jack decided to sell the ranch, she would have no choice but to accept that decision and figure out what to do next. Sarah was still sitting on her porch when Jack appeared out of the darkness, walking slowly toward her cabin. He looked tired and stressed, and Sarah felt her heart go out to him. "Rough evening," she said softly as he approached. "That's one way to put it," Jack said with a rueful smile. "Mind if I sit down?" Sarah moved over on the porch steps to make room for him. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "He means well," Jack said eventually. "Michael. He really does care about me. And he thinks he's looking out for my best interests. But you disagree with him." "Completely," Jack said. "He sees this place as a burden, something I'm stuck with because of family obligation. He can't understand that it's actually what I choose. What makes me happy." Sarah wanted to ask directly whether he was considering selling, but she didn't know if she had the right to ask such a personal question. Instead, she said, "What makes you happy about it?" Jack turned to look at her, and in the moonlight she could see the genuine pleasure in his expression. "Everything," he said simply. "The animals, the land, the work itself. The feeling that what I do matters, that I'm taking care of something that will outlast me." He paused, then added, "And lately, having someone to share it with. Having you here has made me realize how lonely I was before. Even though I didn't recognize the loneliness at the time." Sarah felt her breath catch. "Jack, I know this is complicated," he said quickly. "I know you work for me, and that makes any personal relationship between us problematic. But I need you to know that having you here has been the best thing that's happened to me in years." Sarah stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying that we?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you," Jack said quietly. "And I'm hoping that maybe you might feel something similar." The words hung in the night air between them, and Sarah felt as though the entire world had shifted. For weeks, she had been afraid to acknowledge her own feelings. And now Jack was offering her everything she had hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. "I do," she whispered. "I feel the same way. But Jack, what about your cousin? What if he's right about the ranch? What if you'd be better off selling and starting fresh somewhere else?" Jack reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not keeping this ranch because I'm afraid of change or because I don't know what else to do with my life. I'm keeping it because it's who I am, and because I want to build a future here." He turned to face her more directly. "I want to build that future with you, if you're willing. I want you to be my partner in every sense of the word, not just my employee." Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you'll stay," Jack said. "Not just for the 30-day trial period, not just until you find something better, but permanently. I'm asking if you'll help me prove to Michael and everyone else that this ranch isn't just a relic of the past, but a foundation for the future." Sarah thought about all the times in her life when she had run away from situations that became too complicated or demanding. She thought about her pattern of leaving before she could be left, of protecting herself by never investing too deeply in any one place or person. But looking at Jack's face in the moonlight, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his expression, she realized that running away would mean giving up the best thing that had ever happened to her. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll stay. I want to build that future with you." Jack smiled, and Sarah saw relief and joy transform his features. He leaned forward and kissed her gently. A kiss that tasted like moonlight and promises, and the beginning of everything she had never dared to hope for. When they broke apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. He said, "I want to ask Michael to leave early. I don't want to spend the next 3 days arguing about decisions I've already made. Is that terrible of me?" "It's honest," Sarah said, "and sometimes honesty is more important than politeness." The next morning, Sarah woke early and prepared an elaborate breakfast, wanting to send Michael off with a good meal even if the visit was being cut short. She could hear the two men talking in the living room, and while she couldn't make out the words, the tone seemed more resigned than argumentative. When they came into the kitchen, Michael looked disappointed but not entirely surprised. "Jack tells me he's made up his mind about the ranch," he said to Sarah. "I hope you understand the responsibility that comes with that decision." "I do," Sarah said simply. "And I take that responsibility seriously." Michael studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I hope you both know what you're doing," he said. "And I hope you'll be happy." After Michael left, Jack and Sarah stood on the front porch and watched his car disappear down the dusty road. The morning sun was bright, and the mountains looked close enough to touch. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked. "None," Jack said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "What about you? Ready for a lifetime of early mornings and hard work?" Sarah looked out over the ranch, at the cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures, at the horses gathered near the fence, at the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. She thought about the 3 weeks she had been here, about how much she had learned and changed, about the person she was becoming in this place. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do," she said, meaning every word. That afternoon, they rode out together to check the cattle in the far pastures. Sarah was still learning to ride, but Jack was patient with her inexperience, and she was beginning to feel comfortable in the saddle. They moved slowly across the rangeland, checking on animals and enjoying each other's company. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you," Jack said as they paused to rest the horses near a small creek. "What's that?" "The day your car broke down, when you first arrived here, I had already decided not to hire anyone," Jack said. "I had interviewed 3 other people, and none of them seemed right. I was going to withdraw the job posting." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "So what changed your mind?" Jack smiled. "You did. Something about the way you handled the crisis. The way you didn't let the car trouble defeat you. You could have called a tow truck and gone back to Los Angeles, but instead you walked up to my door and asked for the job anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." "I didn't have money for a tow truck," Sarah said with a laugh. "Maybe not," Jack said. "But you could have asked me to call one for you. You could have given up. Instead, you turned a disaster into an opportunity. That's not something you can teach someone." As they rode back toward the ranch house in the late afternoon light, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had arrived as a desperate woman with a broken-down car and no prospects. Now, she was part of something larger than herself, something that connected her to the land and to a man who saw in her possibilities she was only beginning to recognize. "Jack," she said as they approached the barn, "you should know that I've never been in love before. Not real love. I don't know if I'll be good at it." Jack reined in his horse and turned to look at her. "Sarah, you've been good at everything you've tried since you got here. You learned to cook for ranch hands. You learned to work with animals. You learned to ride a horse. Love isn't that different. It's just another skill that gets better with practice. And if I make mistakes, then we'll figure it out together," Jack said simply. "That's what partners do." As they cared for the horses and finished the evening chores, Sarah felt a deep contentment settle over her. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, with someone who valued her for who she was, rather than what she could provide. That evening, they sat together on the front porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned brilliant orange and pink, and the air filled with the peaceful sounds of animals settling down for the night. "You may hurt me," Sarah said softly, voicing the fear that still lingered in the back of her mind. "Eventually, everyone does." Jack reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Maybe," he said honestly. "People aren't perfect, and relationships take work. But Sarah, I promise you this. Any hurt I might cause you will never be intentional. And it will never be. Because I stopped loving you." Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling some of her old fears beginning to dissolve. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for, without even knowing it. A place where she could be fully herself. Work that mattered, and love that was both gentle and strong. The ranch spread out around them in the moonlight, peaceful and permanent, and Sarah knew that she was home.